So welcome to the beginning of my read-through of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Today we are reading The Fellowship of the Ring, the Foreword and the Prologue, which is all I got through because there was just so much that I wanted to talk about just from those two little sections before I even get to chapter 1. But before I do begin, I just wanted to start with 3 really quick housekeeping things. The first one is thank you. You're all awesome. And the second is just a reminder that these videos are super casual. They have no structure. I have read the Silmarillion but not read the Lord of the Rings, so the context is that I'm now reading these technically in chronological order, and probably it will be a little bit chaotic because I'm going to want to go back and forth between the books. And also on this channel, for those of you that don't know, I don't only do Tolkien stuff, okay? I also do other book reviews, so please make sure that you get rid of the notification bell because I don't want to slam you with a whole bunch of stuff when I upload other videos too. And the third thing is an apology, because there are a lot of people in the comments who were urging me to read The Hobbit before I jumped into the Lord of the Rings. And I just wanted to say I'm really sorry because I don't actually have The Hobbit and I've already started reading The Lord of the Rings. And I know that all of your urging comes from a really good place and nostalgia and wanting to share joy with another person, because you're like, yeah, but it's good if you read that before that because there's stuff that you'll pick up on that you otherwise wouldn't have got. So I feel quite guilty about not reading The Hobbit, and the only thing I can say is that I'm a creature of whim, and my whim is telling me that right now I want to read The Fellowship of the Ring. And it's really hard to logic against that emotion that I have, because emotions don't often listen to logic, do they? Or perhaps I just have too much Melkor in me, I do not know. But I mean, at the end of the day, I read the Silmarillion before the Lord of the Rings, and there were a few people saying, this is ridiculous, you should be reading Lord of the Rings before the Silmarillion because you will get more out of the Silmarillion that way. If I hadn't have started reading the Silmarillion first, then I just never would have read anything. So I always have to go for the thing that I want to read next, otherwise I won't read anything at all. And I've learned that fact about myself, and I'm comfortable with it. And sometimes we just have to listen to our hearts. And hey, maybe in like a month's time, I'll get halfway through this book and want to read The Hobbit, and then happy days, that would be awesome. So yeah, truly a heartfelt apology. I hear you, I totally do, and I know that it's coming from a good place. And if you want to express any further comments on me not reading The Hobbit before starting The Lord of the Rings, you may do so in the comments, but please can you address it to the Dark Lord Sauron on his Dark Throne, because I feel like Sauron needs more complaint letters and I would very much like to read his complaint letters. Anyway, so has anyone actually gone and translated what's at the top and the bottom here? I need to do that. I really need to do that. At least the bottom script, because that looks like some kind of Tengwar or something. Okay, so 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die. Really hate it how us as men are like defined by our mortality. Like that is the one defining feature that we have in this world, the fact that we will die. It's like, it's kind of depressing and annoying. I want to be an elven king under the sky. 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. Which I feel like should be the end of the poem, but no, you get a repeat of the 5th line, in the land of Mordor where shadows lie. I went to look up to see if this poem was part of a greater poem, and this was just a little snippet of it. But it looks like this is just a standalone poem that Tolkien wrote for The Lord of the Rings. And I just find that really cute. In my mind, it feels like it's said from the point of view of Sauron. Because, I mean, obviously, the fact that he calls himself a Dark Lord on his dark throne and repeats in the land of Mordor where shadows lie, it just feels like it's something Sauron would write, which is funny that he was like, well, I've made these rings, now I better get the propaganda out. Let's write this poem and spread it around just to freak everyone out. Spoilers, he never made a ring. It's just a poem. So the foreword is written by J.R. Tolkien, and I imagine that it was written and added into this edition and potentially not in the first edition, but I do not know. The first thing I kind of want to talk about with the foreword was a lot of what I've read is in his letters. So this, I think this is the revised and expanded edition of J.R. Tolkien's letters. I'm about halfway through this at the moment. I'm up to the part where basically he has published all three of The Lord of the Rings, and he's kind of replying to letters and critique, which is quite cool. And so a lot of this feels like what I'm reading in the foreword. So if anyone is interested in like just his reactions to publishing the book and then going into detail about certain meanings and things, I highly recommend the letters books. It's just fun to read anyway. He was a good writer, so his letters were good, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think people are going to be reading text messages and emails that we're sending to each other in 100 years' time. But back then, paper and ink was in short supply, so one really thought about the words that they were going to use in a letter to someone. And a lot of this, once again, is in the letters that he talks about the fact that he wished to complete the story of the Elder Days, so that would have been the stories in the Silmarillion, before he went on to publish or write anything post The Hobbit. I had little hope that other people would be interested in this work, especially since it was primarily linguistic in inspiration and was begun in order to provide the necessary background of the history for Elvish tongues. It is still wild that he had to make up all those stories just to justify these languages he was making. Oh gosh. I don't know, in a way it kind of takes away, like the stories didn't spring to his mind, he kind of had to force them into existence to fit all of the languages anyway. And then when he sought advice, the little hope that he had that other people would enjoy it became no hope. And so he went back to writing The Lord of the Rings during the 40s, I think. He says here, the story was drawn irresistibly towards the older world and became an account, as it were, of its end and passing away before its beginning and middle had been told, which in itself is such an eerie and haunting thing about The Lord of the Rings. And even though I wish that we had everything published chronologically, there is a really high chance that the publishers were correct, that if The Lord of the Rings didn't come out first, people might not have been as interested in the stuff before because there were so many illusions and so many ruins. Like, it feels like a world lived in, an ancient world that has passed and you're just walking around on its ruins. Kind of like in the book called Prince Caspian by C.S. Lewis, and the four children walk back into Narnia and realize they're walking around on the ruins of their kingdom from hundreds of years prior, and suddenly they're like, this world has some stories. He also writes here that he had many duties that I did not neglect from 1936 to 1949, and many other interests as a learner and a teacher that often absorbed me. So it did take him a long time, over a decade, to finish these books. And it was a very busy time of his life. And, you know, he wasn't willing to give up his life. And also he probably couldn't have, he had to earn money. So I just find it so interesting to think about, what if he just dedicated his life to fantasy writing? How much more would we have? I love how Tolkien's like, well, yes, people, I have my critics, but let me just slam my critics in a very kind and subtle way. He's like, and this is such a universal truth, right? Some who have read the book have found it boring, absurd, or contemptible, and I have no cause to complain, since I have similar opinions on their works. Like, such a burn. Or of the kinds of writing that they evidently prefer. So he's basically just saying that, look, the people that don't like my book are also going to be the kind of people that I'm not going to like what they like either, which is true. We see that really frequently, and it's quite interesting and a good reminder for all of us that when someone doesn't like something about us, something that we've done, something that we have an opinion on, or something, a hobby of ours, and they think it's weird, just to remind ourselves that you probably think that all of that person's hobbies are also weird. And there's just no crossing over in the Venn diagrams of your mutual interests and likes. And that is just the way the world works. And to learn to then not take their criticisms and opinions seriously or with too much weight is an important lesson. So thank you, Tolkien, for reminding us of that. It is not possible in a long tale to please everyone on all points, nor to displease everybody at the same points, for I find from the letters that I've read and received that the passages or chapters that are to some a blemish are by others specially approved. So true. The most critical reader of all is myself. Then Tolkien notes that his greatest critique that he actually agrees with, that has been noted by others as well, is that the book is too short. And I have not read The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but I must say it must be too short if he required so many appendices to explain stuff. It just shows us how much more he really could have expanded on the actual story of The Lord of the Rings, and maybe diverged a little bit from the main story of Frodo and the Fellowship and brought in all these other characters and told their stories. I'm sure he probably wanted to, but he also had deadlines. And he was a mortal man doomed to die. We only have so much time. The book is too short. Life is too short. And the other thing that he notes, which I also found really interesting, is that he was talking about how everyone's asking him in a lot of the letters, like, what's the meaning of this? Why did Samwise say this? What did you mean by, what was the symbolism here? And Tolkien is just like, please, it was a story. Nothing more. He basically says here, I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. So he's basically just saying that no, there was no allegory here, there's no meaning, it was a story in and of itself. He says, I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader and the other in the purpose and domination of the author. So basically, he's like, sure, there's a lot of applicable stuff that I'm writing about that the reader has the autonomy to apply in any way they see fit. But allegory is something that the author is purposefully engineering to shove down the throats of their readers to get a message, political or otherwise, across. And he repeatedly denied that and actively went out of his way to deny it, essentially, because he just didn't want that association in Lord of the Rings. And I haven't read it, but I feel like he's correct in that. I really don't think that he was trying to force a particular worldview upon people. And forcing a worldview upon people is the kind of thing that Sauron did, and he definitely went out of his way to demonstrate how Sauron was wrong in that, trying to become a king of the world. Okay, so now we get up to the prologue, which is called Concerning Hobbits and Other Matters. And it's a very short little section, which I think potentially goes through a little bit of what occurred in The Hobbit, but also expands upon just the history of the Hobbits. Of note, I'm surprised that they range between 2 and 4 feet tall with an average of 3 feet high, and it just seems so short, but you're right, they're literally half the height of humans. I absolutely adore how he describes them. Their faces were, as a rule, good-natured rather than beautiful. Isn't that just lovely? It's so nice. At the end of the day, you don't need to look at someone beautiful. You want to look at someone who has a good-natured face. That makes you feel so much better. Broad, bright-eyed, red-cheeked, with mouths apt to laughter and to eating and drinking. What a life to be a hobbit. Amazing. And laugh they did, and eat and drink, and often and heartily, being fond of simple jests at all times, and of 6 meals a day, where they could get them. I find it funny that, at some point, I can't remember where, the hobbits were, after the Shire Reckoning, they They adopted a lot of language, the Western language, whatever it was, but they kept their own time because their calendars go with the years of the Shire reckoning, which is like the equivalent of, like, the first year of the Shire reckoning is like 1000 something of the Third Age. And they kept all of the names of their months and the days of the weeks, but still could not come up with a name for second breakfast. It's just funny. Come on, guys. So it seems that the hobbits at some point came over the Misty Mountains from the east to the west. And why they later undertook the hard and perilous crossing of the mountains into Eriador is no longer certain. Their accounts speak of the multiplying of men, the shadow in the forest that's now known as the Mirkwood. Apparently, much of Hobbit history has just passed out of record because I don't think they were the biggest record keepers of that in particular, or they just weren't concerned with it. Probably both, by the sounds of it, of that, which is their nature. The Rings of Power did try to make a guess as to their wandering days and what that might have looked like, but I won't talk about the Rings of Power because it seems to trigger many people. What we do know is that there's 3 main types of hobbits: the Harfoots, the Stoors, and then the Falahides, which were the least numerous but tended to be the leaders. I'm assuming that Bilbo and Frodo were kind of Fallowhide mainly in descent, but I don't know. Yeah, here we go. Even in Bilbo's time, the strong Fallowhide-ish strain could still be noted among the greater families such as the Tooks and the Masters of Buckland. Buckland? And Bilbo is, I assume, I might just have to have a look at some... So, okay, yep, so there is an appendix here, and I'm sure the appendix... Here we go. Yes, in appendix whatever, we have appendix C, family trees. We have the Baggins of Hobbiton and the Tooks. Oh, okay, so the Baggins and the Tooks are different lines. Oh, wow. Starts with Bilbo Baggins. Where is Bilbo? Oh, okay, yeah, so Bungo and Belladonna, Bungo Baggins and Belladonna Took married and produced Bilbo of Bag End. I love this here. The last battle at Fornost with the Witch Lord of Angmar, they sent some bowmen to the aid of the king, or so they maintained, though no tales of men record it. They didn't send anyone. They may have armed themselves with bows and kind of walked in the general direction of where they were supposed to be fighting. They didn't go. Oh, I love this. It is probable that the craft of building, as many other crafts beside, was derived from the Dunedain. I hope I'm saying that right. Dunedain. So, men. But the hobbits may have learned it direct from the elves, the teachers of men in their youth. So lovely. Actually, going back to page 11, there's something here. Those days, the Third Age of Middle-earth, are now long past, and the shape of all lands has been changed. So is this the Third Age of Middle-earth, those days are long past? So is this prologue kind of written from the perspective of like the 4th, 5th, 6th age? If the shape of the land has been changed from what it is in the Third Age, must be a very long time. Yeah, it's just a weird phrasing here. It's almost like it's written from the future, looking back. The shape of all lands has been changed, but the regions in which hobbits then lived were doubtless the same as those in which they still linger. The northwest of the old world, east of the sea. So it's almost like this prologue is written from like the 5th age, and we're like, yeah, they lived in Eriador for ages, they're still kind of in that area, but so much has changed that I don't even know if you could call it the Shire anymore. They did keep genealogical trees apparently, and at the end of the Red Book of Westmarch there is a small book that most hobbits struggle with because they aren't big readers, and I love this line. Hobbits delighted in such things if they were accurate. They liked to have books filled with things they already knew, set out fair and square with no contradictions. It's so interesting, and it kind of makes me realize, like, this is why men were going to always come to dominion over Middle Earth, because we ourselves, sure, we like a good book that, you know, strokes all of the knowledge that we have and tells us that we're correct about everything in the universe. But I think more than that, we like things that challenge us, things that make us think and exercise our brain. And that trait alone is enough to drive a race forward to progress. Not that there's anything wrong with what hobbits are doing, but the only thing that the hobbits seem that they have progressed on is their use of pipeweed. We have a map of the Shire at the end of this with the 4 quarters, which I think is really good. The farthing quarters. They did have policemen, but they didn't do much. I love this line on page 14. The land was rich and kindly, and though it had long been deserted when they entered it, it had before been well tilled, and there the king had once had many farms, cornlands, vineyards, and woods. So many men lived previously where the Shire was, and so there was a lot of fertile land. I just love the line, the land was rich and kindly. It's just such... The hobbits really, they chose the perfect land to live in for their personality. They probably spent a long time to get there, but still. So now we get to the bit about the finding of the ring. And I definitely agree that Bilbo kind of cheated in the what have I got in my pocket riddle. Like, that's not a riddle, but Gollum accepted it. Even Tolkien writes this line, the authorities, it is true, that's authorities with a capital A. No idea what authority he's referring to. The authorities of riddles. The authorities, it is true, differ whether this last question was a mere question and not a riddle, according to the strict rules of the game. Game with a capital G. I love this so much. But all agree that after accepting it and trying to guess the answer, Gollum was bound by his promise. Gollum. I do remember my dad reading this to me as a child, and my favourite part was the back and forth between Gollum and Bilbo and all of those riddles, and I was genuinely on the edge of my seat when I was listening to Dad. I was like so scared for Bilbo. I was like, oh my god, he has to get out of here quickly, Bilbo. I remember that gut reaction. So I remember almost nothing about the book except for that gut reaction that I had lying in my bed eating an apple as Dad read to me. Very interesting up here about Bilbo and lying. So Bilbo had found the ring before he even saw Gollum. It says here on page 22, now it is a curious fact that this is not the story as Bilbo first told it to his companions. To them, his account was that Gollum had promised to give him a present if he won the game, but when Gollum went to fetch it from the island, he found the treasure was gone. Bilbo guessed that this was the very ring that he had found, and as he'd won the game, he deemed it already his by right. But being in a tight place, he'd said nothing about it, and made Gollum show him the way out as a reward instead of a present. This account Bilbo set down in his memoirs, and he seems never to have altered it himself, not even after the Council of Elrond. Gandalf, however, disbelieved Bilbo's first story as soon as he heard it, and continued to be very curious about the ring. Eventually he got the truth out of Bilbo after much questioning, because the wizards seemed to think that the truth was important. Oh, Gandalf. He also thought it important and disturbing to find that the good hobbit had not told the truth from the first, quite contrary to his habit. It's a bit confusing as to what the truth was and what Bilbo was saying, but I think the point here is that as soon as Bilbo had the ring already in his pocket, even if it only had it for less than an hour, already it had started to change his behaviour, make him more likely to warp the truth in order to hide its true presence, and I just find that absolutely fascinating. And that's how I'm going to pretend that that is actually what happened here, which is obviously why Gandalf would have been really interested in like getting the truth out of Bilbo, because he would have been like, well, I can tell you're lying, but why? Like, Bilbo, why would you lie about this? I'm Gandalf. What am I going to do with a lie and a truth? I'm here to help you. Fascinating. Also kind of fascinating that Gandalf kind of left it for many years and didn't figure out the truth of the ring until Frodo had it. Like, Gandalf, were you just like chilling? I absolutely love this line. It ended me and I had to read it twice. And especially because it is early spring here in Australia, and so my garden is in full bloom and there are so many bees and it's just such a beautiful time of year. The weather is perfect, blue skies, barely any clouds, or like the really fluffy clouds. The hobbits named it the Shire, a district of well-ordered business, and there in that pleasant corner of the world they plied their well-ordered business of living, and they heeded less and less the world outside where dark things moved, until they came to think that peace and plenty were the rule in Middle-earth and the right of all sensible folk. I just want to pause there and say that is just so amazing. Imagine living in such a peaceful time that you come to think of peace as like a human right. Like, what a beautiful sentiment to have and to stick to. And definitely something that would really only exist in a microcosm in so many ways. But like, everything is just ordered and perfect and nothing changes and everything has its proper place. And can you imagine Feanor going to the Shire and just breaking down with stress? Like, what are you doing here? What do you mean you're not creating? What do you mean you're not progressing forward? Why aren't you building towers in the sky? What do you mean that you are content with just existing? Feanor would have a mental breakdown in the middle of the Shire just from his complete disharmony. Like, there would be a huge dissonance between his worldview and the worldview of the hobbits, and I want to see that. I want to see that. See, this is what Rings of Power should have done, just made it a whole comedy so that we could see scenes like that. But then the line continues, it says, they were in fact sheltered, but they had ceased to remember it. And that is probably my favourite line of the prologue. When you are so sheltered and so peaceful that you cease to remember that you're peaceful, that implies that you have no war or disorder to compare anything to. So you don't actually call your lives peaceful because you know nothing else. This is just life. Like, we know what peace is because we know what something is when it's not peaceful. So we need words to describe something that's peaceful. But the hobbits, it seems like they probably had no need to describe their lives as peaceful anymore because they'd ceased to remember that there was any other way. It was just their life. And that is just amazing. Well, in fact, Tolkien uses the word sheltered. So same kind of thing, like they're so sheltered from the outside world that they've even forgotten that they are sheltered. That is just amazing for hobbits that, you know, initially when they settled down in the Shire, they would have been very wary of the fact that there's still evil lurking around, and they would have been vigilant for a good period of time. But then they kind of realized that, oh no, like this little region here that is the Shire is actually quite peaceful and sheltered from most of the darkness that is dwelling around the outskirts. So we're just going to stay here. But then over many years and generations, they just forgot that the Shire was sheltered and probably just assumed that this is just the way it was everywhere because they were so sheltered. Amazing. Love it. It's like when you're a kid, you know, and you're protected, hopefully, by your parents and sheltered by them. You don't think of yourself as sheltered. That's just life. That's just your childhood. It's not until you get older and you go to school and you can get bullied, or you get your first job and you realize that you could get fired, or people could say awful things to you for no apparent reason. That's when you're starting to think, oh, like back then I was sheltered. I just didn't know I was sheltered because that was just normal life. Also, interesting point, and I don't know if this does come up in The Hobbit. Everyone's like, go and read it, then you'll know. I know. The thing that most intrigued me is that there are 3 elf towers, this is on page 16, 3 elf towers of the immemorial age, immemorial age, were still to be seen on the tower hills beyond the western marches. They shone far off in the moonlight. Yes, of course they shine with moonlight because the elves made them. The tallest was furthest away, standing alone upon a green mound. The hobbits said that one could see the sea from the top of that tower, but no hobbit had ever been known to climb it. I love how they make up stories. They're little heroic stories and fantasies. True story. Hobbits are the first fantasy writers. They write about things they would never do in real life. No different to us in that regard, I suppose. A few hobbits have ever seen the sea, and fewer still have ever returned to report it. But anyway, those elf towers, what were they? So they're east of the Shire. I don't know what they were. I'm assuming something from the Second Age. So I'm going to keep that in mind. Maybe these elf towers never come up ever again, because we don't ever get stories where hobbits are going east unless they're going to the Grey Havens. But what are these 3 elf towers that were seen on the Western Marches? Are they actually part of something? Like, they're not on this Hobbit map. So I'm gonna look into that. The last thing is the very last bit of the prologue, page 25, which I kind of got like a little bit of like a kick in the gut. So Elrond departed together with some of the High Elven folk. I'm assuming with High Elven they're talking about the... Like, are they talking about the remaining Calaquendi? Or, I don't know. It is said that Celeborn went to dwell there after the departure of Galadriel, but there's no record of the day when at last he sought the Grey Havens, and with him went the last living memory of the elder days in Middle-earth. Wow, that's just... Celeborn is a Teleri elf who was originally in Menegroth with, like, with Thingol and Melian and Daeron and Luthien, and he chose to stay because of course he did. Like, I mean, his original place where he grew up in Menegroth is under the sea, but it must be so hard for him to leave, especially because when you know you leave, you can't come back because no one's coming back anymore. Apparently you can't. The Valar still are not allowing people to come back. They're too scarred from when Feanor left. They're like, please no one else leave. But also just that line that there's no record of when he last sought the Grey Havens. Oh, see, this is where it gets me. It's like this is written... It's like this little prologue bit was written from the perspective of some historian in the 5th or 6th age who's like, I'm just going to do the history of the 3rd age. Not much left of that. Probably half of it's not true, but that no one knows when Celeborn left is sad. Like, that's the last... with him and everything that he experienced in, you know, like pre-First Age, the First Age, the Second Age, all of it is gone completely. We don't even know when he left. It's like he probably just got up one day and decided to leave. And I don't even know why I'm so obsessed about this, but this just really, this twists my heart because it's like all of that stuff that happened, all of it, now it just seems like nothing. Like it just disappears, like it truly just fades. And when something's faded, no one cares when the light finally goes out because you're kind of forgotten about it. Like, that's exactly how it feels reading this, and that's exactly what Tolkien wants people to feel, just like that awful fate of the elves who are going to fade, where men will continue to burn in little small doses, but burn nonetheless. And I have so much that I want to say about the mortality and immortality juxtaposition. It's just so fascinating. And with him went the last living memory of the elder days in Middle-earth. poor Celeborn, like, just everyone else that knew his life and knew the things that he experienced are all either gone back to Valinor on the boats, or they are mortals, so they have passed, and everyone that was mortal that would have possibly remembered anything about everything he's gone through is also gone. Like, and all their descendants are no longer even half interested in a bunch of stuff that has come to pass, because Celeborn must be like if he was like 1,000 or 2,000 years old by the time in the first age, then he must be like 6,000-7,000 years old. Assuming that he decides to like stay for the whole of the fourth age and maybe part of the fifth age, the world as he knew it would have changed so much, and all of the records, he would have got to the point where he just wasn't even interested in trying to maintain the records that everyone would have kept, because he would have just been like, what is the point? Who am I going to share it with? Am I just going to keep it in a library for myself? Like, that would have been really depressing. At least when he went back to Valinor, he would have been reunited with people who understood, which would be lovely. Unclear if he really was the last one that went back, because there would have maybe been some other stragglers. Like, I imagine there would have been a lot of like those initial like dark elves and the Avari elves who didn't even go with the crossing, like the first Sundering, like they didn't even leave Cuivianen. Like, they also probably would be the least reluctant to still go over to Valinor, but because that would be in their nature. But also at the same time, I feel like many of them probably are dead or turned into orcs. So there's not many of them left anyway. Probably got absorbed into something. But yeah, just, geez, Celeborn, like, what a thing to take upon yourself, right? What a thing. Like, he's the only one that remembers stuff from Menegroth, right? And Doriath, because everyone was killed during the second kinslaying, thanks Maedhros. And so, except for him, Galadriel, probably a few people who escaped over to, over east to, I'm gonna forget the name, went to Curdon, basically, Curdon, and with Elwing would have been taken with them. And with him went the last living memory of the elder days of Middle-earth. That is just... If Tolkien's idea is to make us sympathize with what it must be like to be immortal, like, I can feel it there. Like, he's faded so much that he's not even interested in trying to preserve anything. And Celeborn must have quite a strong ability to keep his Fëa bound to his Hroa, or his spirit bound to his body. I believe I've said that correctly, but I could be wrong. Because a lot of other elves probably just couldn't have lived that long and continued on without literally fading themselves. And as for maps of those 3 elven... I'm just gonna have a look here. Where is... Oh, there's so many cool maps for the beginning of the Third Age. And battles. I need to read that. This book, by the way, is Atlas of Tolkien's Middle-earth. Let's find a Shire map. Here we go. Let me zoom out a little bit here. So yeah, okay. There are 3 elven towers, also known as Emin Beride, and then very close to the Grey Havens or Mithlond. So those towers were... I assume elves still live in them. Yeah. Amazing. Okay, now I need to go back and read early Third Age stuff, because it's all this Witch King of Angmar business, which... Because Sauron had been defeated at the end of the Second Age, right? But then this Witch King was just like, yo, I'm still here. Where is all this written? All these exciting things. Anyway, I'm going to start reading Book 1, Chapter 1, The Long Expected Party, and I'll see you next for that.